In the previous video, we have created or added rather colliders to our map so we can collide with our walls. We cannot exit this area. What we are going to do now is just quickly let's make the floor prettier by going to our tile palette, making sure that we have selected a floor as the active tile map, and we have here some additional elements for our floor tiles. And what we can do is choose the brush, select this, and what we can do is place the hole in the floor, or this crack in the floor, as a whole sprite, so a couple of sprites. We do not need to place them separately. So this is one of the more useful ways that you can use the tile palette tools. What we can do is now select a couple of those cracks and place them randomly somewhere around the map. What is great about the separation of tiles is that we can place it underneath the wall and it still be visible, the wall still be visible on top of it. So we can add a lot of those additional decorations to our floor, and we do not have to worry about destroying the whole setup for our floor. So what we can do is add some of those cracks here as well, and to the side of it maybe. So this is kind of good way to add some decorations. Okay, this looks pretty decent. I think we have too much of those, so we can place a whole floor cell to here, and now we are able to add one of those cracks, and that looks pretty good. So another thing that we want to do in this video, let's make sure that we are in the selection tool in the tile palette, so we do not accidentally place here a tile. And what we can do now is add a camera to our player. So let's quickly go to the window, package manager, and what we will want to search for is Cinemachine. So Cinemachine is a pack of camera presets that can be used for different games. And this is again from Unity Technologies. So we are using the Unity Technologies additional package. Let's install it. Okay, let's give it a bit. Great. When you're done, close the package manager. And what we can do right now is in the top menu, we can see that the Cinemachine has appeared. What we want to do is click here and let's create a 2D camera. Great. So now this is our Cinemachine camera. This is a extra game object that was added to our game. Now what we can do is in the inspector we can use the Cinemachine virtual camera, has the follow and look at positions. We can simply drag our player to the follow position and to the look at position. And now all the setup for the camera is driven from this camera Cinemachine virtual camera. So when we press play, all we have to do is simply start moving, and we can see that our camera is following our player around the map. And this is great. So now we have fixed this issue. Okay, let's stop it. Last thing that we will want to do is maybe let's select our camera and let's choose the environment. Instead of skybox, let's choose in the inspector the solid color, and let's choose it and let's make it black. Now if you press play, we will see a black background instead of the blue background around the walls of our dungeon, and this is great. In the next video, we will take care of adding some light effects to our scene, because right now we have our global light, but for some reason it doesn't really work on our tiles, so nothing is affected. So we are going to make sure that it works in the next video. See you there. In the previous video, we have implemented our Cinemachine camera to follow the player around, the player avatar, but currently we have discovered an issue with our lights setup. So when we want to go to our global lights and change the intensity, which should change how we see our scene, it does nothing. So what is going on? Let's stop the game, and inside our global light 2D we have the light 2D component, and it says it is experimental. We have some settings here that you can set, and here is the target sorting layer. Now currently it is set only for default. But keep in mind that we have recently added a couple of those layers, of those sorting layers. So what we can do now is we can set this global light for all layers. And now, if we change the intensity, we can see on the screen that our whole scene is getting darker or lighter because every sorting layer is affected by this intensity. Now let's try a value of 0.35, something like this. And this will give our game a bit of a dark vibe. So this will create some kind of atmosphere of fighting the demons and struggling to get through those dungeons. So it is in the spirit of a roguelike game. Now, we have fixed the lights, but now our scene is pretty dark. One trick to make sure that our player always knows where to look at is to add a light to our player so we can know what is around our player while keeping the rest of the scene dark, and then we can add some point lights, some torches to our scene to point players' attention where he or she should go. What we will do is we are going to open our player and we are going to create inside our player, right click in the hierarchy, create a light, choose 2D light, and let's choose the point light. Now nothing has changed because still we are targeting the sorting layer default if we select our point light 2D. So instead, let's again choose all, and now our player is a bit brighter. What we can do is we can play around with those settings. So let's increase the outer radius of our light 2D, and let's set it to something like 4. Okay, that's better, maybe 4.5. Great. Next, we can change the inner radius to make the inner circle a bit darker. So let's set it to 0.7. Of course, you can play around with those settings as you wish them to be. We can modify the intensity, but I think 1 is good value. We can change the color of our light. So let's give it some kind of torchy yellowish tint. For example, our player is carrying a torch throughout its journey, and this would be good. Now what else can we do? If we play or press play now, we can go down and we can see that our wall is being lit but not from the correct side. So we are targeting the front sorting layer, and this wouldn't be correct in terms of how the light works. So what we can do is we can change the target sorting layer inside our point light to the inside our player game object to not hit the foreground, I believe. And now we have this effect of being hidden behind the wall, and only the things around the player are lit, but we are not lighting the front of the front wall. So this is something to consider. Sometimes you will have to add some more sorting layers because now we are not shining on the top of our wall of this decoration, which is correct, but maybe you want to have it highlighted. Okay, great. So we have added this light, but now our dungeon is pretty dark. In the next video, we will create some torches that we can place in the corners of our room so we can highlight it a bit, leaving the center with this dark tint, so making this look like a dungeon. Okay, see you in the next video. In the previous video, we have fixed the lights in our game so that we now have this highlight of our player, but the whole scene is darker. Now, what we want to do in this video is to add some torches to our scene so we can light up our room and maybe direct our player's attention to a specific place. For us, it will be just a decoration since we are in the section of creating a map. So let's go a bit further, and instead of just leaving it like this, let's add this additional light. So what we will want to do is check out the project section and go to _sprites, and there should be the torch. Great. This should be already prepared, and you can see that this has a slightly higher pixel per unit value. So this might mean that this sprite is much bigger than the rest of our sprites, and it might look a bit less pixelated than our character. We will take care of it in a bit. So let's drag our torch underscore sheet underscore 0 into our scene. It will be invisible, so let's change its sorting layer in its sprite renderer to be on the foreground for now. And we can see our torch in our scene view. Great! Now we can see already that this contains a lot more pixels and it is much smaller than what we have elsewhere. So if we want, we can change its pixel per unit to be 16, and now the torch will be much too big. So what we can do is basically either scale our torch or change its pixel per unit value back to, I think, what was 64. Great. And now we will deal with the difference in number of pixels, since this is another CC0 asset that I have downloaded. Now hopefully you will have all the assets in the same pixel, with the same pixel resolution, but for us it will be good enough for now. What we are going to do is we want to use the animation for this torch, so we have this torch animated. So what we are going to do is simply add to our torch underscore sheet underscore 0. Actually, let's rename it to be simply torch. Okay. And we are going to add to it, add component, and let's type animator. And we should have the animator. Now, we will need to create an animator inside our underscore animations folder. So let's go to it. Let's right click, create, and let's choose animator controller, and let's type torch animator. Great. We can assign it by going back to the hierarchy to the torch and assigning the torch animator. Great. And what we can do now is select the torch and open up our animations and open up our animator. If you don't have those windows opened, just go to the window, animations, and you can both open animation and animator. Okay, great. We do not have any state here, so what we can do is simply use the animator window, animations window, and create, let's call it the idle torch. And let's create a new folder and let's type maybe other, because we are not going to have any other animation than this for the torch. So we can save all those simple animations in the other folder, and this will be our animation. Let's go back to our scene view, and what we can do now is go to our animation window, open up in the project view the sprites, the torch folder, and drag our sprites into our animation. Let's select them all. Using Shift, you can select all of them and drag them into your animation. And again, to have a smoother animation, we can drag the first, so torch underscore sheet underscore 0 sprite as the last sprite, and we can focus on this torch. We can disable the light using this icon here to see it more clearly, and let's see the animation. Okay, great. It should be good. Let's select all of those, just dragging your mouse, holding the left mouse button to select all of those, and let's try dragging them across the timeline. Let's drag them around maybe 0.50 seconds, something like this. Let's try playing this. Okay, it looks pretty good. And now, if we disable it, we can see that we only have our torch. It doesn't contain a light, so we cannot really light up our scene with it. So what we will need to do is stop playing the animation, and we can add to our torch as the child another point light. So let's right click in the hierarchy, light, 2D light, and let's add a point light, for example. Great. Again, we need to set the target sorting layer to be all, and actually we can again uncheck the foreground, so we are not affecting the walls from this side. Great. Now what we can do is we can disable the gizmos to see a little bit better what we are doing, and again we can play around with the values. I happen to like as the inner radius 0.5, as the outer radius about 8. Okay, so it will light a room a bit. We can decrease it to be 7, something like this should be good enough. Next, what we can do is again choose a brighter color, so we can choose something like orange or yellow. Great. Since our torch is on the foreground, we are not highlighting it, so let's select our torch And let's change its sorting layer in the sprite renderer. Instead of foreground to be the background elements, and now it is lit as well. Great. So now we can see that what we can do here is modify the intensity. But if we press play now, we can see that nothing is changing, so it is very unnatural because light flickers and changes its intensity depending on the flame. So what we can do is stop the game, go back to our torch in the hierarchy, go back to our animation, and now we should be able to add a property, and here should be a point light 2D. What we can do here is choose this drop down and choose the light 2D, drop it, and choose the intensity. And now we can change the value of the intensity depending on the frames of our animation and make our flame flicker. We could also do it through the script and make it more random, but this is much easier for us to do, so let's do it this way. So what we can do is drag our line on the timeline and change the value to something like 0.8. Maybe go down to 1.6 in the next frame. 1.6. Next, let's grow it to 1.9. Let's choose 2.1 in the next frame. The next one maybe be 2.2. And let's drop on the last one back to 2. Okay, let's play it. And you can see that the light is flickering. It is flickering pretty slow. So we can choose those frames, select all of them, and decrease the on the timeline to be like something like 0.35. And you can see that our light is flickering. So now what we can do is leave it like this, or maybe you want to tweak it a bit, or maybe you want to use a script. Okay, so we have our animation. We would like to make a prefab out of it so we can modify it. So let's create a new folder inside our assets. Right click, create a folder, and let's call it _prefabs. Great. Let's drag our torch into our prefabs folder, and let's make it into a prefab. So now we can modify all the values and it will be changed in all the instances. So what we can do is make sure that you choose the move tool. If you want to use shortkeys, it is W, and we can drag it into one of the corners. We can duplicate it, choosing it in the hierarchy and using Ctrl D, shortkey. Okay. We can duplicate it again to drag it into the corners of this room. And now we have our lights in our scene. Let's go into the animations to our game view. And now if we press play, we will be able to experience the lights on our player. It is getting lighter. The colors on our player are getting brighter in the light and darker in the shadows. And we should probably place those torches somewhere on the wall instead of floating in the air. So let's stop the game. One thing that we will want to do is make sure that those torches are placed somewhere in believable space. So this will be hanging from this wall. The second torch will be on this wall. Okay, and we cannot see it because our wall is on the same layer as our sprite renderer for the torch. So let's change the order in layer to be 1, so it is visible on this background wall. Again, let's choose the torch 2 and place it somewhere here. And actually what we can do is go to the torch 1 where we have changed the order in layer and choose in the inspector overrides and apply all. And now we should be able to see that our torch 2 has automatically been updated with this value for the sorting order, the order in layer. Okay, great. Last one is the torch 3. Let's drag it down a bit so it is only visible from above the wall. Great. We can raise it a bit. Okay. In the next video, I want to introduce you to the shadow system for the 2D light so that our player will cast some shadow when it walks towards the light source. So see you in the next video. In the previous video, we have added some torches to our room. What we can do is, to make sure that this is more organized, let's make sure that we drag our torches into separate game objects. So let's right click in the hierarchy, create empty. Let's make sure that the transform in the inspector is reset. So let's click those 3 dots and reset it. And we can change the name to light. Of course, we can organize it a bit better if we have more rooms, but for now it will be sufficient. Let's choose all those torches from the hierarchy and drag them into the light game object. And this is great. Now I want to introduce you to the 2D shadow system. So what we can see is, if we press play, now if we get closer to the light source, we would like to have a shadow casted behind us. So what we can do is stop the game, and there is a special component for it. Let's go to the hierarchy, choose the player, open it up, choose the avatar since it contains our sprite render. So we would like all the scripts connected to the rendering of our player to be here on the avatar. Let's choose add component and let's type shadow. And we should have shadow caster 2D experimental. I'm going to minimize the sprite render as well as the animator, so we can see more clearly what is going on in this shadow caster 2D. So let me show you the documentation for this component. Okay, so you can see that the shadow caster 2D component defines the shape and the properties that the light uses to determine it casts shadow. You can read here more about the properties of this component. Let's go back to Unity. Great. So we have the use render silhouette checked and cast shadows checked. What we can do is choose the target sorting layer, and again we can exclude the foreground from it, so we are not going to cast shadow on the side of the wall that is in front of the camera. And now what we can do is focus on our player in the scene view, and inside the inspector in the shadow caster 2D component we can choose the edit shape. And we can see that it has selected the shape of our frame from the tile map, but we can modify it dragging those wide balls here, and on top of that we can add some more of those. So we can add it by clicking on the line and drag it to make sure that our sprite is casting a decent shadow. Now of course do mind that we are animating our sprite, so we do not have to necessarily make sure that this is in every nook and cranny of this sprite. Just make sure that you generalize it a bit so the shadow looks decent enough. Play around with it, make sure that you have some kind of shape outline here for the shadow. Okay, and I think this should be good enough. Even this, I think we have too many of those dots, so I can delete it using the delete key on the keyboard. Okay, great. We can add one more here. Yep, it should be good enough. Great. We can finish editing the sprite. Now what we can do is make sure that we can we press play, and let's see if we are already casting the shadow. And let's walk towards light, and we can say that we are not casting any shadows. So let's stop the game, and I'm going to go to our prefabs, torch, double tap on it, choose the point light to D here, and make sure that the shadow intensity is set to 1. Okay, we can Ctrl S to save it and go back using this arrow in the hierarchy. Great. And now if we press play, we can go closer to this. And now you can see that this shadow is being displayed. And now we can go here. As you can see, I have removed accidentally one of the tiles from our tile map. I'm going to reset it, play again. And now you can see that all our torches will leave some kind of shadow when our avatar comes close to them. And this is how we would set up shadows for all the characters in our game. Now you can see that we are casting a bit bigger shadow because our character is being animated constantly, so it only fits 1 frame. So make sure that you fit your shadow to be a bit maybe smaller than the character, so we can edit our character. So let's go to our player, avatar, focus on it using F inside the scene view, edit our sprite, and make sure that we lower it a bit, so make it a bit inside our sprite. Okay. And now we should be good to go to cast a decent shadow. Again, this is pretty novel, so I am not an expert in working with it, but basically that's how we would go about adding a shadow to our avatar or to our enemies or to the elements inside our game. Okay, now let's press play and let's see if it looks a bit better. Let's go up here. And we can see, yeah, this looks much better. Great. So one last thing that I want to fix is that our torches are more dense in pixels than the rest of our world. So we are going to fix it in the next video. In the previous video, we have added shadows to our character, so when we get closer to the torch, the character will cast shadow behind it, so it will be much more realistic, and we are adding this 3D effect to our 2D game. That is great, but one last thing that we are bothered with is that our torches are a bit more dense in pixels than the rest of our world, which doesn't look very good. But Unity provides us with something called Pixel Perfect Camera. A bit of an update regarding the newest version of Unity 2020.2. This lecture is about Pixel Perfect Camera, which will allow us to tweak the resolution of objects in our scene so that they are with a low pixel resolution, so that we can see that this torch now is low pixel resolution instead of being high pixel resolution, and everything looks pretty good and works pretty smoothly. Now if I jump to the version Unity 2020.2, okay, so let me play the game and we will see that now the movement is very jittery. Now the Cinemachine is causing some issues when it is providing the dampening, so when the player is moving now it doesn't follow it exactly but gives it a bit of a breathing space. So now you can see that there is an issue with the same setup. The issue is in the Pixel Perfect Camera itself and how it works with the Cinemachine. So there is not much I can do about it. So the best thing we can do for now is to simply disable this Pixel Perfect Camera, so disregard this lecture. We are going to receive those torches, they will be the high pixel resolution, but still the movement will be nice and everything will work fine compared to enabling the Pixel Perfect Camera, which worked pretty good in the previous version of Unity. So sorry about this, I will search for a solution for it, but if you are working in Unity 2020.2, please disregard this Pixel Perfect Camera video until I can find a solution or Unity updates the Pixel Perfect Camera script. Okay? If you are following this course with the Unity 2020.1 as it was previously recommended, just keep going and watch this video. If you are following in 2020.2, disregard this Pixel Camera video and continue to the next one. So let's go to our hierarchy. Let's open up our main camera. I have minimized the camera and the rest of the scripts added here. And what we can do is try adding, and let's type pixel. And we have Pixel Perfect Camera Experimental. Since the previous Pixel Perfect Camera was for the standard rendering pipeline, and this is for the new universal rendering pipeline. And what we can see here is there are some settings here. So, because we have the assets pixel per unit value, that is why we should have all the assets set to the similar or exactly the same pixel per unit value. But since we do not have such assets at our disposal, let's set here 16, since most of the assets are set to be 16 pixel per unit. Now, other settings are the reference resolution. What we can do is make sure that we run this in edit mode, and what we can do is modify this value. For us, this is 320 by 180. We can increase it to 240, and you can see that the picture is smaller. So I think 180 is proper size for us. And what we can do is also check the upscale render texture, and we can drag here the mouse to see that if enabled, the scene is rendered as close as possible while maintaining the screen aspect ratio. So we can check it. Okay, and now we can see that if we run it in the editor, our torch is being very much pixelated, which looks much better than the high resolution torch. So let's uncheck this run in the edit mode, And let's press play to see how our game looks like now. And you can see that now the torches are much smaller, much more pixelated, and they overall fit our resolution, and we do not have to rescale them. And you can see that in the scene view it is not so. So this is the with much bigger resolution, while the torches we see on the screen, let's zoom in, it is much more pixelated and fits much better into our overall game aesthetics. Great! So I think that is all. Now, in the next section, we are going to start implementing the basic mechanics for the shooting. I hope you are enjoying this course. See you in the next section.